My name is Michael Green. I'm chair of the Inter-Governmental Committee. With me, I have Councilor Joe Driscoll from the 5th District, Councilor Sue Boyle from the 3rd District. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us who you're from and where you're from and everything.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Brad Tito. I'm Program Manager for Communities and Local Government at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. I'm here to talk to you today about community choice aggregation.
Do you want to head right into
Sure, I'd be happy to get started. I have some presentations if anybody wants a handout to walk through it as you go. Just be aware that they're here. So thank you, Councilor Green, for inviting me here today. Members of the council, administrative staff, I'm very happy to be with you. So I'm here today to talk again about community choice aggregation. But let me just start with this. So when you move into a new home, the utility is your default energy supplier. The utility bill has two components. You pay a supply charge and a delivery charge. And with deregulation, you can switch the supply portion of your bill to a third-party supplier known as an energy services company or an ESCO. So most people who switch are motivated by a desire to save money. They're trying to lock in a lower rate. So, you know, you shop around. Have you ever done this? Okay, so let me just switch the slide here. A little awkward. Not hard to see, but that's why we brought handouts. So this is a website called New York State Power to Choose. So you type in your zip code. There's a whole bunch of different options you get. In this case, there are 115 different offers. There's monthly rates, yearly rates, variable and fixed. So you have green products, non-green products. They all have different fees, deposit amounts, renewal terms, cancellation fees. Honestly, it gets pretty confusing. But I guess nobody wants to leave money on the table, right? I think most people would lock in a lower rate if they could, but there's sort of a distrust and a skepticism of these ESCOs where you think you're getting one thing and maybe it's a very different deal in practice, where, you know, everything seems okay for the first few months and then you start getting a jacked up bill, and nobody wants that. Has anybody had a good or a bad experience with an ESCO? Anybody use an ESCO now at home? Okay, so about 20% of utility electric customers in New York State have a third-party supplier. So the Public Service Commission has adopted standards for ESCOs to ensure that some of the deceptive sales and marketing tactics that you might have heard about are now expressly prohibited. But really, to be informed consumers, you know, we need to do our homework. And let's be honest, we don't all have the time or the energy. So imagine instead if we could team up with thousands of our fellow citizens and businesses to form a purchasing block. And if we're supported by a team of energy market specialists and expert attorneys negotiating on our behalf to get us the best possible rate. You know, so that we could actually dictate terms, so that the ESCO signs a contract written by and for us, not just whatever they hand us to sign, where we really have true economies of scale and we can negotiate from a place of strength. You know, what kind of prices and terms could we get then? Maybe we could beat these prices. I think by joining together into this kind of purchasing block, we're really in a better position to do that. And while we're at it, why can't we demand local clean energy to create jobs and investment right here in the city of Syracuse? Well, we can, and that's why we're here to talk about community choice aggregation. So CCA for short. CCA is established through a local law that allows the local elected officials to choose where the energy comes from for their community. It's a program to purchase power in bulk for virtually all homes and small businesses in the city. All eligible customers are automatically enrolled in the program. So it's an opt-out program. This is a defining characteristic of CCA. Customers are automatically enrolled and they can choose to opt out. So with CCA, the utility remains responsible for delivering electricity. If you have a power outage, you call the utility. But with CCA, local governments join together, and so it's not just one, it can be many. They join together into this bulk purchasing arrangement and competitively procure energy supplies with the help of a CCA administrator. With CCA, we aggregate the energy supply needs of residents and small businesses within Syracuse, for example, or any other participating jurisdiction. The local government, again, with the support of a CCA administrator, negotiates and enters into energy supply contracts with an ESCO on behalf of these customers. So communities can choose cleaner power and develop partnerships to connect customers to clean energy products and services like community solar, but also things like smart thermostats and energy storage, even discounts on electric cars and energy efficiency retrofits. And the real question is, why go it alone when we're so much stronger working together? No matter what direction we want to go with our energy future, by joining together, we're better positioned to secure lower prices and more consumer-friendly terms. So here's the most important point, though, is that CCA is so much more than just a better way to shop for an ESCO. So I hope to communicate some of that to you in this presentation. And before we move on, I just want to take a deeper dive into some of the fundamentals of CCA, the mechanics, roles and responsibilities of the different parties, the agreements that you might enter into if you get involved in this, the status of CCA activity in New York State, and then we can talk about solar and some of the other exciting opportunities that you might want to consider. So let me just stop here and ask if there's any questions. No? Okay. This topic is a little bit complex, so feel free to stop me at any point.
We did have a presentation on this before. Actually, the previous council had a couple presentations, and I think this council's had one presentation, but it's still relatively new to everyone.
Okay,
but we may not have as many questions.
All right. So when you switch to an ESCO, you enter into an ESCO contract. Well, actually, let me back up a second. All right, so the graphics aren't great. The handout is going to look better on this. As I mentioned, you move into the area. The utility is your default energy supplier. It's very simple. You pay your bill, the money goes to the utility, and they supply you with electricity. When you switch to an ESCO, you enter into an ESCO contract. You pay the same utility bill, but the ESCO is listed as your supplier. So what happens behind the scenes is that the ESCO has an agreement with the utility called a building services agreement, and there's a purchase of receivables transaction. That's how the ESCO gets compensated for the energy that they're supplying you through your ESCO contract. Well, with CCA, the main difference is that the individual customer does not enter into an agreement with the ESCO directly. The municipality enters into an ESCO contract on behalf of CCA customers. So that's agreement number 2 in the graphic. The municipality chooses a CCA administrator. That's agreement number 1, and the administrator does a lot of the legwork of getting the CCA up and running and operating it. Agreement number 2 provides for the ESCO to pay the CCA administrator directly, so there's no money out of pocket for the municipality. And let's just talk a minute about your constituents. So anyone within your jurisdiction can join. So anybody can join, but not everybody is automatically enrolled. Remember, this is an opt-out program. Residential and small commercial customers get automatically enrolled. So that's rate classes SC1 and SC2. However, customers who already have an ESCO, or if they have a block on their account, or if they're a large commercial or industrial customer, they can participate, but they have to opt in to participate. They're not automatically enrolled. So this is mainly for residential and small commercial customers, and we're not going to switch people out of an existing ESCO contract if that's their current status.
What is the line, like, as far as the separation between a small company and a large company?
So it's just defined as rate class. What I understand is that some pretty large businesses are in that SC2 rate class. Okay. I can't say exactly what the range is, but
I could look it up.
Yeah, you're talking
separations SC1, SC2.
Yeah. So the customer will continue to pay their utility bill just like they always have. And if they don't like it for any reason, the customer may opt out, return to the utility or an ESCO of their choice. So are there any questions at this point? Okay. So I'll let you stop me if you have any questions. The next slide, I'd like to just talk about the roles and responsibilities of different parties. There's a lot on this slide, but we just put it all in one place. And I found it useful to go through so that everybody understands, based on where they stand, what their roles and responsibilities are with respect to CCA. So in this case, the municipality, the city of Syracuse government, ultimately the city would be responsible for the CCA program. They authorize CCA by adopting a local law. They enter into contracts with the CCA administrator, and later on an ESCO and possibly other vendors on behalf of CCA customers. Your decision to authorize the program is considered a proxy for individual customer consent to participate in the program. So, some elected officials that I've spoken with are uncomfortable with the idea of the government deciding on behalf of their constituents where they get their energy. However, you should just consider that when you move into the area and the utility is your default supplier, that's a decision that was made for you by the state. So with CCA, you're shifting that decision from the state to the local government. The bottom line is that in either case, your default supplier is being decided by the government. The question is, do you want the state to decide or do you want local control? So very important, the city is front and center, conducting public outreach and education, informational meetings, sending out notice under municipal letterhead. You're very much involved in making sure that this is well understood by your constituents. Next, the CCA administrator. CCA administrator will enter into agreements with participating municipalities. They'll facilitate the process of preparing and submitting a CCA implementation plan, a data protection plan for the Public Service Commission to approve. There's several components that must be approved by the Public Service Commission, and they sort of handle that part of it. The CCA administrator also handles all the procurement. So they're going to solicit bids from the ESCOs for energy supply and other value-added clean energy products and services, and whatever other services are required for the operation of the CCA. They're going to receive their fees, again, from the ESCO, which collects them as a portion of the supply charge that CCA customers pay. And then the CCA administrator has responsibilities with respect to reporting and accountability measures. Now, the utility will deliver energy to the CCA customers. They'll respond to service interruptions. They exchange data that's needed by the CCA. But just a quick note on utilities. Without knowing, it may appear that CCAs are in some way in competition with utilities, or that CCAs are bad for the utilities or a threat to their business. It's not the case. Utilities in New York don't derive profit from energy supply. The fact is that CCAs are not in competition with utilities, and if you look at the record, their comments show general support for CCA, although they do look for ways to ensure the way it's implemented doesn't create an administrative burden. So if you look at the comments, it's really about how the data exchange goes, different things that would basically prevent them from expending a lot of money. Like, for example, there's data fees that are charged. Well, that was the whole thing, is like, it would cost us a lot to try to get you all the data that you need for a CCA to operate. So they worked with the Public Service Commission and created a fee schedule for that data. So they're getting actually even revenue streams from the CCA. So that's kind of the utilities role.
Wait, could you dig into that a little more?
Sure.
So the data exchange, that's what would be contained in all that data? What type of data is going back and forth?
So initially, there is aggregated data, which is not personalized individual customer data. It's aggregated to say, how much demand is there from SC1 and SC2 customers in total in City of Syracuse and any other jurisdictions. That kind of information is used to sort of size the CCA. In many cases, in other parts of the state, they're very rural communities. So you have to kind of make a determination. How many of these small rural communities do you have to get together into an aggregation before you really have a competitive bid? So, so there's the aggregated data on the front end. And then when you're actually executed a customer contract with when you execute a contract with the ESCO, there's a need to exchange data about who's opting into the program, who's opting out to the program. You actually have account numbers and things exchanged between mostly the ESCO and the utility, just to make sure that whoever is enrolled, we're keeping track of them. If they want to get out, we can track that and get them out. If they want to come in, they can come in. And if they want to opt up to a higher product like a green option, we have that all done through this kind of data exchange.
And the burden of all that data collection and response to constituents who want to opt in or opt out, that's all on the local partner organization, correct?
No, it's on mostly the ESCO, actually. Part of what's built into their contract is that they have to handle the exchange of data with the utility, sort of like the way they do without CCA. I mean, with individual customers, they might have thousands of customers in this area. They have to do the same kind of business with them. Now, there are provisions that would allow for the CCA administrator to receive this data, but they have to sign a data security agreement. They have to submit a data protection plan to the Public Service Commission to get it approved. And that data protection plan really outlines what are all the protocols that they're going to put in place to ensure that nobody's personal information is mishandled.
Okay.
So I have a question along those same lines. It seems like the data regarding, the number of customers and the amount of usage would be, I guess the way you explained it just didn't sound like the way I thought it was, would be more on the CCA administrator and the ESCO, and then the data that I was expecting would come from the utility would be more regarding infrastructure.
Yeah, no, it's not infrastructure data at all.
It's not, okay.
It's really just about accounts and demand. Really what the ESCO needs to know in order to go to the wholesale energy market and buy blocks of power to meet the 100% of the power supply needs of the participating customers is just demand data. There are a couple of different categories like KWH, KW. They want to know how many accounts. That is the kind of information you actually want in the bid that goes out to the energy services company. So the one piece that I think I might have missed for you is that before you go to bid, you get some of this information that's aggregated. You put that into the bid documents, and that's what the ESCO is responding to when they're giving you a price. If it's much larger or much smaller than you thought, that can throw their pricing out of whack. So they want to get a good sense as to what the actual demand is once the contract gets executed, and some of that aggregated data gives them that information. It's only when you execute the contract that the individual customer data starts exchanging really between the ESCO and the utility, just to make sure that the opt-outs and the opt-ins and everybody's tracked properly.
Okay. So,
Sorry, go ahead.
well, I know you want to get through these points on this, but I do want to circle back to a question about our infrastructure at some point. So just
Sure.
cue me when you're on that. And
Sure. and there's probably a number of other developments that happen in the regulatory proceedings that could provide information on infrastructure, specifically with respect to where would solar be well suited and other issues. But I'd like to get a better feel for what kind of infrastructure you're referring to.
Well, what I'm wondering is, you're from New York State, obviously you're familiar with sort of infrastructure in other areas of the state, and I'm wondering if our sort of power supply lines, if sort of what we have in place to deliver energy in the city of Syracuse is adequate for, or if it's going to hold us back, cost us more money. Are we in a good place to do something like this, or do we need to see improvements before we do something like this?
So none of the infrastructure issues would impact this at all. So you wouldn't have to wait for any kind of improvements to the transmission system before you went ahead with CCA. The state of the city's transmission infrastructure is not something that I'm familiar with, and I would have to go and look and see whether or not I could refer you to somebody who would know. But as far as CCA is concerned, the infrastructure itself isn't a consideration.
It doesn't make, like a better, say, infrastructure delivery system wouldn't make it, wouldn't give us a better price, wouldn't work in our favor financially as far as getting a bid price on the delivery?
No, it wouldn't.
Okay.
So
Easy answer.
So the next would be the energy services company. Do you guys all have the presentation, right? Okay,
Yeah, I just had one more quick one. So
Sure.
were you saying that, so this kind of aspect of it, you're saying is kind of the biggest hurdle when implementing the kind of the data exchange aspect of it and kind of the service? Am I understanding it correct when you said that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's, in the process of establishing a CCA, going through the development of an implementation plan, getting that approved, passing the local law, going through the public hearing process and all those things. And there's a lot involved in getting the infrastructure, getting the CCA established. So I think once you've gotten to that point, the data exchange, it's governed by a well understood process. Any CCA in the state has to sign the same data security agreement. Their data protection plan is evaluated using the same kind of criteria. So I don't want to say it's an easy part of the process. It's just an established part. What I found is that if you send the data security agreement to your corporation counsel and you have them review it, they'd be like, I wouldn't sign this in a million years, because there's a lot of liability that the signatory is assuming when they take responsibility for individual customer data. They essentially have to replicate the same data protection standards that a utility or an ESCO have to abide by under like the current regulatory environment. And there's a significant burden. If that data gets lost, you're on the hook for like millions of dollars in liability. So so the city wouldn't have to sign that data security agreement. The city wouldn't get that data and start analyzing it in your Excel spreadsheets. It would really be the CCA administrator, but more importantly, the ESCO.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So the energy services company, or ESCO, they're going to enter into agreements with the municipality directly to supply 100% of the electricity and natural gas or natural gas needs of participating customers. The ESCO is going to receive payments from the utility for the energy procured by CCA customers, and they're also going to pay the CCA administrator their fees they're due. So again, there's no money out of pocket from the city. All these systems are set up, all these contracts are set up, to cost the city nothing. But the local partner organization or program organizer. So the program organizer may be an advocacy organization, a volunteer group, a nonprofit. It could be a county government or other local government, but this is like the group that's going to be first in the door to sort of propose the CCA, or we see this typically. They may be instrumental in securing early buy-in. They may play a role in ongoing public outreach and education pertaining to CCA, or even more broadly, community energy planning in general. But the program organizer, they may be retained to provide ongoing services in support of CCA. They may be paid out of the fees collected by the CCA administrator. However, any fees that are collected by CCA customers, they need to be used for costs associated with operating the CCA. So I bring up the program organizer because a lot of times that's actually where we start. We see these activist groups or other community groups that come and they say, city, we want you to start considering CCA. And so they may have a role, they could have a role in the ongoing operation of the CCA.
So I have a question about that. Since we aren't necessarily working with a local partner, and it does say that municipalities can be considered this local partner, right?
Yes.
Would the city of Syracuse be able to benefit from these fees?
Yeah, I mean, if you had costs associated with operating the CCA, you could write that into your contract with the CCA administrator that you would get reimbursed for any of those costs. So that's certainly an opportunity as long as it involves the operation of the CCA. So yes. And then NYSERDA. NYSERDA offers a toolkit on our website. You can find a copy of the order that authorized CCA, along with a bunch of templates, things like the legislation you would use to authorize CCA locally, other agreements you might enter. There are templates there. We also offer technical assistance from our clean energy community coordinators in each region of the state. In Central New York, Chris Carrick and Amanda Mazzoni of the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board. Chris is here today. They're working on NYSERDA's behalf to provide technical support on CCA and the other high-impact actions under NYSERDA's Clean Energy Communities program. You guys just submitted your 4th high-impact action. You guys are actually on the verge of getting a nice grant to recognize and reward you for your clean energy leadership. So Chris and his team can provide a lot of assistance. We're here to help, so please don't hesitate to connect with Chris or with me on any clean energy topics that you might be interested in pursuing at the city level.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
And I apologize for our tardiness. We were serving food at the Krause Hospital Employee Appreciation Day.
Nice.
Council President's still up there. 2 questions real quick. I was going to ask about Westchester, but I see it here, so that answers my question. I know Rochester is giving some consideration to this approach as well. So forgive me if this has already been answered in terms of what the, maybe it seemed like there would be some benefit obviously to the city fiscally, but the fees are passed on to the taxpayer if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
I know with ESCOs on average, while they often promote a decrease in costs, National Grid actually doesn't lose any money, and then on average this is about a 20% increase annually, on costs. $20 increase annually. I'm sorry, okay. $20 increase annually. So I guess in from that perspective, when I would think that the idea is to not only conserve energy, but in some way that ultimately saves the taxpayer money.
Right.
Does that actually happen here?
Yeah. So we can talk. Let me. I'm going to get right into that. Okay. So there are currently 4 community choice aggregation programs authorized in New York State. The first was the pilot in Westchester. So they started in 2015. They're still the only operating CCA in New York State. They have an enrollment around 100,000 utility accounts. So think of those as households. So that's a lot of households. 20 participating local governments. 14 of those have gone to have a default of 100% renewable energy. So it's a real green project from them. 14 of the 20 participating local governments chose that the default supply would be 100% renewable. They claim in their annual report to have saved nearly $10 million for ratepayers since the program's inception. It really got operating in 2016. And that's compared to what members would have spent if they had stayed with the utility. I've run the numbers, and it looks to me like if you have the brown product versus the green product, you're saving about $3.50 a month. I mean, it's not a lot of money. If you had the green product, you're maybe saving $2.50 a month. So you multiply that by tens of thousands of households, it starts to add up. It's like an injection back into the local economy. But again, they claim that based on their entire program, they're looking at about $10 million over about 2 years back into the pocketbooks of their ratepayers.
And that's just in 2 years.
Yeah. So, and there's no guarantee that you're going to save money. I mean, I just want to make it clear that you can't, nobody can predict the future costs of the utility. So, you might fix in a rate, but what happens if the utility price drops down real low? If you were on the utility, you would have been saving a lot, relative to the CCA. So, we look at, what's the likelihood that the utility price goes down. You're almost always going to lock in your price based on, you're going to look back at the previous 12 months or 24 months. You're going to establish a benchmark for what people are paying their utility. Then you look at the bid and you say, is it below that 12-month or 24-month trailing average? If it is, then we're going to go ahead. So you're going to lock in a price that is good relative to past performance, but you don't know what the future holds. So so it's really, the case is if the utility price really drops from where it's been, that's where it's going to be sort of underwater. Now, anybody can switch back to the utility at any time without fee or penalty, but you just have to be cognizant of the fact that this isn't like a guaranteed savings program. It's got somewhat of an uncertain outcome, but overall, by joining together, we're better positioned to secure lower prices than if we're each individually trying to shop for an ESCO on our own. So there are 3 CCA implementation plans that have been approved by the Public Service Commission in recent months. That's Mega, good energy, and Joule assets. And there could be more in the future, but I'm not aware of any others that have submitted an application at this point. So you're really talking about Mega, Good Energy, and Joule assets. These organizations are actively recruiting communities to join their CCAs. You've probably already heard from one or more of them. When it comes to selecting a CCA administrator, this is a really important decision. You have options. It's a good idea to compare their different offerings. You may want to conduct a formal RFP process for CCA administrator services. And it's probably best to do this as a group of municipalities if you're going to team up with others rather than just doing it individually, although you can do it individually. And it's not required. Remember, this isn't an expenditure of municipal dollars in any fashion. So my understanding is, like with general municipal law, your procurement rules really are about if you're going to spend money. In this case, you're not spending money. So just be aware of that for the Corporation Council's consideration.
So what,
yeah.
Sorry if I interrupt, sorry.
Absolutely.
So just so I understand, what are the, how to say this? Syracuse going it alone as a municipality versus having to implement something like you're discussing kind of county-wide or something.
Right.
What would be the price difference there? What is the feasibility of us going alone, and what are the advantages of going county-wide? Or would we have to go county-wide, or could we just get like DeWitt and Manlius in, or how does that break down?
Right. So you guys are big enough that if you put out a bid, it's going to attract bidders, and you're going to have that kind of market clout that we're really looking for with CCA. Just going it alone. I think that it would be a shame for others not to have access to the market clout that you're bringing. So if you did it and then a bunch of surrounding towns try to do it on their own separately, they may not get a competitive bid. So there's
more like put out the offer and then you could expand the clout. Right?
Good Energy's been knocking on our door for a while, and I've had several conversations with them. And according to the Good Energy folks, there are already several of our surrounding towns and villages that are kind of waiting to see if Syracuse is going to do it.
There you go.
And they're all ready to go. Like Fayetteville, and I know they're ready to go, and everybody's kind of, because Good Energy keeps calling me because they got all these other people ready to sign on, apparently.
They've
Which
got
ultimately will help us with our numbers.
Right.
There are about 6 other local governments in New York State that have adopted local laws authorizing CCA in central New York. And that number is probably going to grow. So
Syracuse would be the lead in the county as far as...
it's like the anchor tenant, if you will, of the CCA in this region, if that's how it comes out. Right.
And Westchester is the only one to implement it so far?
Yes.
So
to put out the bid.
There's 3 others that are in the process of approving the laws to discuss, get the conversations going, but Westchester is the primary to get it implemented and see the savings thus far?
Yes, so the others have put a detailed plan together. They've submitted to the regulators. The regulators have given their okay. And with that implementation plan, they submitted a number of local laws that have been passed by towns and villages, cities that are working with them. And so that's the beginning, and they want to grow and get as many other communities on board as they can.
And the state of New York supports CCAs as a clean energy?
Yes, we see it as having great potential to help the state meet its clean energy goals and also to help local governments achieve their clean energy goals. But clean energy isn't all there is. I mean, I started by saying, this is more than just a better way to shop for an ESCO. Because when you buy ESCO power, there's no guarantee that it's green. You can choose a green product, and we could talk about what the implications of having a green product are. What I will say is that if you look at the opt-out rates and the attrition in Westchester's program, the opt-outs were lower, the attrition was lower in communities that went with the 100% renewable product than actually those that didn't and had saved more, which is odd. People are actually pretty content with the 100% renewable green option, just based on the overall numbers.
Maybe some clarity can be provided for me, because I guess the only thing I'm kind of struggling with, it's avid. Your point in regards to the inability to predict what tomorrow holds is valid, and knowing that so many customers have been, just to be clear, dissatisfied with ESCOs because of the marketing and promoting of cost savings, and then they end up paying more, annually. Only $20 more on average, but more nevertheless. And even here, we talk about affordable rates, which sometimes can be a colorful term.
Right.
And naturally, when people see affordable, they think, oh, you're cutting my costs, right? And the city would ultimately, if it made this decision, promote it the same way. Problem is, it may not be true. Affordable, I'm talking about to customers.
Sure.
Because it certainly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm seeing the potential revenue generation for the city, I'm assuming. Sure. And I'm assuming that's the potential benefit. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. But in a city where the median income is $33,000 and people already struggle to pay National Grid, I don't know how we sell increased costs, or improbability of increased costs for the individual.
The city itself would get revenue?
Well, you could get revenue if you have tasks that you complete that are involved in operating the CCA. And even things like the time your corporation counsel spent reviewing contracts, all that stuff could theoretically get reimbursed. It doesn't need to be, but it can be. There are other options using, well, I won't get into that. But as far as to your direct question, by forming a CCA and putting the contract together yourself, you have the opportunity to put in very consumer-friendly terms in there. And one thing that people are upset about with ESCOs is that everything's fine for a month and then all of a sudden you get a jacked up bill.
That's right.
Right? With CCA, you have it very clear in the contract. No matter what happens, the price is never going to go above the fixed rate. So you're never going to get a price escalation somewhere down the road. It's going to be a fixed rate for the 2 or 3 year term of the contract. You have the market clout, which you're trying to get the best possible price. You're beating people, as an individual going to the marketplace trying to secure an ESCO, you're just sort of, you're trying to fend for yourself. Teaming up with tens of thousands of your fellow citizens, that's business that these ESCOs want to earn, and they're going to bid you the lowest possible price they can to try to win that business. So I think the combination of consumer-friendly terms and that market clout are two reasons why this is maybe a good option from a consumer protection standpoint. The other thing is that these predatory practices of ESCOs, Syracuse would be covered by an ESCO already with the CCA. So would you have a lot of predatory kind of marketing practices at play in Syracuse after this has been set up? Maybe they don't see an opportunity anymore. So,
I guess, yeah, we actually wrote some legislation recently, kind of slow that predatory approach down. I guess there's a sticking point for me, and I could see the probability, if you're using cleaner energy, then you're probably using less energy, and so there's less cost, right? But the data has shown, as I mentioned earlier, National Grid doesn't take a loss on its costs.
Right.
And if National Grid doesn't have a decrease in what you pay, then there's no real decrease. The only thing you could potentially have is an increase in costs. You understand? There was a report done by Tim Canals a couple of years ago on ESCOs and their impact on the market, and the fact these are the things I'm quoting. And even with talking with National Grid, they don't take a loss when ESCOs come in because they're still the provider of the service, the utility. So I guess, and maybe it's just me wrapping my mind around it. I don't want to sound like, just kind of playing the devil's advocate here. It seems like, we as legislators to ultimately sell this to constituents,
That's right.
to convince them, pay more money for cleaner energy. I mean, I want cleaner energy, don't get me wrong, but it's a hard sell.
Sure.
When people are already strapped for cash and National Grid is struggling, 50,000 on average shutoffs a year. That's a real number, So how do we, through this process, reduce that? Because if we can't, then I don't know what we've done.
Well, I suppose if I understand it right, there's an element of risk. I mean, it's much like a bet. Like we could save them $10 million within 2 years, as Westchester done. But if the market, as someone spoke to me, that the market is bet on like every 5 minutes, right? Like the energy market is like a constantly changing beast. So I mean, we have the potential to save 10 million, or if things go wrong, the rates could rise. I mean, I don't know if that's speaking to what you were saying.
It is. I mean, they not for nothing. We know that some preachers to the choir. Many people can't afford to gamble, right?
Right.
They can't pay their bill now, and Westchester doesn't have a median income of $33,000 a year.
Yeah.
Just up from 25,000 10, 12 years ago. So I don't know. It
Right.
becomes a bit of a tough sell because you can't really qualify the decrease in costs. And that's what's on people's mind. And in a city that's strapped for cash, we're trying to find ways to improve that.
I should mention that there are requirements for low-income customers in the CCA order and the preceding kind of orders that have come out of it to say for individuals or households that are enrolled in a utility program for low income, that they are not opted into this automatically. They are the ones that I discussed had a block on their account. The state puts a block on their account. They're not automatically enrolled in this. They can enroll if they want to. The CCA administrators can service this customer base if they're able to provide a guaranteed savings to those customers. So, I just want to be clear that there are rules in place to protect particularly the low-income group.
And are there any penalties for because you said the contract is for 2 to 3 years?
Yeah. So if you talk to the CCA administrators, they will all tell you, I think, there are no fees or penalties associated with dropping out, but that's not like mandated by the Public Service Commission. They want to see in your implementation plan, are you going to charge any fees? The answer to your question is no, but there's nothing to say that if they wanted to, they couldn't put that in their implementation plan, but nobody has. So that's not something that you're going to see. No fees or penalties for people opting out at any point for any reason.
Councilor Ray, I've been talking to Good Energy now for a long time, and I think the points that you bring up were the first things that came to my mind. Was we're not going to take chances with people in the city of Syracuse with all we want are lower rates. And I had asked, like I said, Good Energy. I haven't spoken with any of these other groups, and I expect that we will at some point. But I had spoken with Good Energy specifically about low-income families and the elderly, and they had said to me that we would be able to put into our bid, or we're going to be constructing this however we want, and we could put in programs that would safeguard some of our most vulnerable people. And then to your point, you can opt out at any time. So if you get a bill and it's a little higher than it was last month and you freak out, you can just call them up and say, I don't want to do this anymore, and they'll take you right off with no penalties.
Yeah, and I appreciate. I mean, I think all that we in this dialogue is worth entertaining, of course. But it's just the things that you mentioned is a concern. In my private business, I dealt with National Grid. This is why I know the stats off the top of my head on this very subject matter, not CCAs, but ESCO specifically. And I don't know. It seemed to make sense. I think what Councilor Driscoll was alluding to, and I don't know if this is the case, that when you have kind of this conglomerate of entities involved, it would seem that the cost of the project would decrease, unless we're wrong. And I believe that's kind of where you were going, right? We're kind of sharing the cost and the decrease cost, and that seems very logical. But I guess that's what we have to determine. I understand, though, that we certainly, in the contract, we set the bar as the local government has control over. I'm assuming what the rates are and the like.
Yeah, and you can go very far into this process and still not be obligated to anything at all. So you could pass the local law that's not going to obligate you to anything. You know, you could negotiate. At the end of the day, it's signing that final version of the contract with the energy supplier that is going to lock you in. So if you're not getting the terms that you want to protect the right, protect your constituents, if the prices aren't where you thought that they should be, you don't have any obligation to move forward.
Yeah, the way I understand it is we would pass the law basically allowing the release of the information. And then we could solicit bids. We get the bids, we can look at them, and we can say, we don't want to do this. So that's kind of...
And you can go into it with like a intermunicipal agreement with all the other groups that outline what the specific criteria are that you're going to be looking for as the city of Syracuse. So everybody is going into it with eyes wide open that what we consider a compliant bid, there's a list of those conditions, so that you're not, putting anybody out if you decide not to move forward. Everybody understands what you're getting into.
I also think there will be opportunity for public input between getting the bids and actually making a decision. We could have several public meetings and do some outreach. And
I think that's probably a big element is the outreach,
yeah.
The outreach angle, making sure that people are aware that this is being implemented and that they can opt out and go with the original utility. That's always a huge challenge, getting in touch with everyone. But I think, that's a big factor.
You see what my obvious concern is, and it'll be our responsibility to assure the transparency.
Yeah.
That this may or may not result in a decrease, but I think that becomes a very hard thing to sell at that point. To taxpayers.
I think that the companies will have to come forward as part of their bid with a budget for community outreach.
Let me ask you this to Councilor Green's point, because I made the assumption, but I wasn't sure if it was true. Does it improve revenue for municipalities? I know you mentioned that it could. Maybe if it improves revenues, which means improved services, people wouldn't mind paying that extra fee. But that, for us, we would need some kind of selling point.
My basic understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the city could choose to have city staff help administer this, and if so, we could bill that time back. Mm-hmm. But that's essentially the extent of it,
We would
right?
be basically on the CCA, where it says local partner organization. That would be us.
Right.
So, and we could bill the CCA for an employee or for whatever work is done on our side.
But that's
and they
not,
would take
That's
that out.
reimbursement. That's not revenue.
They would take that out
That's
of
not what
fees
drives
collected.
this, right? I
Right.
mean, you wouldn't.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not
Recoupment of costs.
Mm-hmm.
There are opportunities that address a lot of these issues when it comes to community solar projects, which I think could be a big part of the offering to consumers, which actually has a much more kind of rock solid savings guarantee associated with it. And we could talk about that more, but in theory, you can go out of the gate with we've established this CCA, and in the first mailing that people get, and in all the public outreach and education, you say, and you always have this option to sign up for a community solar subscription. Those subscriptions are basically designed to guarantee a certain amount of savings on your utility bill. And part of the thrust of my presentation is to get to a point where we say, well, we're going to save you a little bit of money, hopefully, with the ESCO, but we can save you some more with a community solar subscription. And you can really go big with those, with specifically like the low income contingent, because they're the ones who are going to benefit mostly from that offer, in terms of the energy burden that they pay, in terms of like the total cost of energy to their income is a much higher percentage for low income than it is for the rest of us. So we can address that somewhat with a community solar option. We could talk a little bit about how to integrate that. But should I continue with this?
Just run through the rest of your thing and then.
Yeah, okay. How are we doing on time now?
It's
We're fine.
It's getting to the
53,
end.
but you're all right.
All right, so
You're gonna hear the presentations.
So, there are things that you'll want to ask the CCA administrator about their qualifications, about what their offer is, if it's limited to just the ESCO supply, or if they're looking at other things like a community solar option. But, you just want to make sure that the CCA administrator is a good match based on local needs and priorities. You can learn a lot by asking all three of these, Good Energy, Joule, and Mega, for a copy of their implementation plan. If you just look at those, you get a very good sense as to what their plan is and their approach. So at a minimum, I'd suggest doing that. Now, if you were to pass a local law to enable CCA, you'd be joining a growing list. I mean, right now, there's something like 66 communities, 67 communities throughout New York State that have authorized CCA by adopting a local law. 6 of them are in central New York. Unfortunately, in your presentation, it shows 2 villages of Menoa, but I've corrected that on the slide above you. But it's fair to expect that a lot more communities are going to join CCAs in the coming years. You see on the map, this map is the utility load zones, and I mentioned community solar. Just a point on while we're on this map is that customers may subscribe to a community solar project if they're located in the same utility load zone as the customer. And you can see it's in National Grid, but it's that purple spot. So it goes all the way up to Oswego. But any project located in this entire multi-county region, could be an opportunity for the city. The big picture here is that CCA is happening. Communities, can be part of it. You just have to determine if it's the right fit for Syracuse. So let me just talk to you a little bit more about this community solar option. This is not actually a community solar project, although it looks like one. I mean, this is what they look like. This is a 2 or 3 megawatt project on a Madison County landfill. So Madison County is receiving lease revenue from having established this on their, brownfield site. So that's a potential revenue generator for the city if it had sites like this, or the county if so. Community solar allows members of the community the opportunity to share the benefits of solar power even if they cannot or prefer not to install solar panels on their property. Project participants benefit from the electricity generated by a community solar farm, which costs less than the price that they would ordinarily pay their utility. Community solar has a very, very attractive value proposition. When you sign up for community solar, you're signing up to receive a discount on your electric bill, and it could be upwards of 10%. And that's something that you can have clarity on before you even execute on the CCA to say we're offering a product to our customers. If you want to sign up, you can get upwards of a 10% discount on your utility bill just by signing up for this. So the CCA, like I said, can save you some money by switching you to an ESCO, and then it can maybe save you some more by offering a community solar subscription. I don't want to get into all the details here, but this graphic kind of depicts what you're involved in and all the different agreements. But the CCA can issue a solicitation. We know today that there are 12 projects, community solar projects, that have been proposed that any individual household in Syracuse is eligible to participate in. Okay, you can say to those 12 projects, because that information is available on our website, put out a solicitation to the solar community. So tell us about your projects. Where are they located? When are they coming online? How many subscriptions are available? What's the fixed discount you're willing to sell us these bill credits that are generated by the project? And with this information, you're driving some healthy competition. You can kind of ensure that you're getting the best possible deal for your constituents on this community solar subscriptions. And it's a good kind of addition. The whole thing is that these solar developers, they love CCA because you don't have to spend a ton of time and energy expense acquiring customers. So if the CCA can kind of hand them their customer base for these projects, they're going to be able to offer you a lower price and save even more for your customers. So that's sort of opt-in community solar.
Can I ask you
sure.
a question? So the CCA with opt-in community solar, to me, is exciting. That's fantastic. That sounds like what we need to do, particularly for our low-income communities.
Fantastic.
So you say there are currently 12 solar farms or whatever that.
Proposed.
Oh, proposed.
Yes.
Okay.
But in order to be at that point where I'm saying that they exist, they've gone through, they're a mature project. I mean, they've gone through some approvals. They're very likely to happen, these 12 projects.
And they're in the vicinity of the city of Syracuse?
So they're in that load zone that could be anywhere up from Oswego down to Syracuse, and we can look at the map to identify exactly the zone. It's likely that in a year from now, you won't even be restricted to that area. You could actually get one anywhere in National Grid territory. So, you know, the catchment area for these projects it could be very large. I mean,
so we have no shortage of lots to use within some of our poorest neighborhoods because we've demolished quite a few houses. And would it be something that we would want to put in a solar farm in our communities? Would that be beneficial? Or
I mean, I think it would. I mean, we have at NYSERDA models, and Chris can talk to you about this all day long. I mean, because he's done this. I mean, do you want to speak to this question of?
Sure. You can come to the mic, Chris, just for our internet fans.
So I know Joe is aware of what we've been doing with community solar for the last 3 years now, which is working with 24 municipalities in the central New York region and the 5-county region to develop either solar for their own use or community solar projects. So there are a number of communities where we're looking at their landfills, for example, where we could build a very large array and service not only the municipality's needs, but provide lower cost power, as Brad was describing, to community residents as a whole. So our projects are still in the development phase. We're not quite at that mature phase. We haven't paid our interconnection fee to the utility, which is the big hurdle, but we're actively working on them now. And so in the next year or so, we hope to have enough solar power to serve tens of thousands potentially of customers.
So these 12 farms each, I'm not super knowledgeable about this, so I'm going to probably ask a simple question. They can serve, each farm can serve a certain amount of households?
Yes, based on their size.
Based on their size,
Right.
Okay. And is there any benefit to being closer to it or further away from it? Or?
Not from a technical point of view. I mean, in the big picture, the closer that the generating source is to where the energy is being used, the better, because we're reducing transmission losses.
And is there any benefit to having multiple small sites, or is it better to have large sites?
There are economies of scale to building larger arrays.
Right.
And the state recently increased the size of the maximum array on one parcel from 2 megawatts, which is about 10 acres, to 5 megawatts, which would be about 30 acres. Now, in the sort of scenario you're describing where we have the land bank that's acquired parcels and maybe has demolished some properties, those are much smaller
Too small.
lots. You know, maybe you have an acre or 2 or something like that assembled. It could be possible to build solar arrays of 200 kilowatts or something in that range. That could serve a neighborhood. That could serve 20 households, for example.
Do you think that would be a worthwhile endeavor?
It's something we could certainly look at. I mean, remember, these are electric generation facilities. So by electrical code, they have to be fenced. And they're, you know,
Not
so there'd be
super
security
attractive, yeah.
concerns and other things that you'd want to certainly take a
I
look
do have
at.
one last solar question, and I'm sorry for going on and on, but so our weather isn't great for solar, is it?
You know, that's one perception we deal with a lot. And so, you know, we've run several solarized campaigns and helped 300 plus homeowners go solar. We actually have enough solar resource to make solar a good investment. So we have about 2/3 of what they have in Southern California, for example. But what makes solar economical is not just how much sun do you have, but how much do you pay for utility power, right? So every solar kilowatt hour you buy, either from your own array or through a community solar offering, is a kilowatt hour you don't buy from the utility. And since we pay a fairly high price for utility power, that solar power can be very competitive.
Right, and I wasn't really referring to necessarily the lack of sunlight that we have, which I know is an issue, but more along the lines of something like this being covered in 6 feet of snow or 3 feet of snow.
No, that's another question we get quite a lot, especially as we're working with these municipalities. So, if you look at the production curve over 12 months, 80 to 85% of the power generated from solar arrays here in this region is generated from May to November. So those winter months, you're maybe making 15% of the total output of the year. So whether it's a homeowner with 7 kilowatts on their roof or a large solar farm, we typically advise people, it's not necessary to clear the snow off of the panels. It's all factored into the economics from the developer.
Very good. Thank you.
Oh, sure.
Along the same lines, but if we were to use one of the brownfields that we do have in the city, how do you determine which properties in the surrounding area can benefit from it? Like, how does that happen?
So as Brad was saying, any customer within the utility area and this NISO load zone can benefit. So we have, I won't name the communities, but we have several communities in the immediate area. So if there was an array in the Syracuse metropolitan area and a customer in Oswego wanted to participate, they could, and vice versa.
Okay.
So.
And what's like a mile radius of how far the electricity travels?
Right, great question. So the actual, from a physics point of view, the kilowatt hours that are produced by a solar array, they go onto the grid, and they go wherever the kilowatt hours are needed, right?
Oh, okay.
What we're talking about here is really an accounting and an administrative process by which there's a meter installed at the community solar farm. So it tracks all the kilowatt hours produced that go onto the grid, and then the community solar developer tells the utility, Joe wants so many kilowatt hours, Sue wants so many, and so forth. And so it's an accounting process.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure.
I have one other question for you about this. When you were originally, just a minute ago, explaining the community solar, you were speaking way above my pay grade, and I wonder if we are. No. I just mean when if this is something that we want to do, to be able to get from here to there, are we going to need to hire someone, or is the city going to need someone to do the business side of,
facilitate
of getting this set up
that
for
process.
us?
Well, luckily, you've got Chris.
City would be welcome to participate in our portfolio.
Okay,
So we
so
have, as I said, roughly 24 municipalities, 35 different sites. We had been talking with the city under the previous administration, and they elected to withdraw from our portfolio before we issued our RFP and selected our developer. But we've structured our process so that municipalities can piggyback onto our process. So
Oh, that's great.
I'd
then,
certainly be happy to talk to.
then they would
the city.
they would technically at that point be our community partner that we would.
So they would facilitate you going through the selection process. I mean, they have sort of an aggregated approach. Let me just tell you that NYSERDA offers assistance with municipal procurement of solar, whether it's community solar or for your own purposes. We have template RFPs and, I mean, a whole range of technical assistance services. So we got your back, and we will be happy to move mountains to try to help you in any way we can.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's what I needed to hear. Thank you.
The city could certainly elect to go on its own.
Well, I get
Happy to
the-
participate with us, but you can certainly go on.
No,
on your own.
no. I just mean, going forward with this CCA sounds great and simple enough for me. Adding the community solar, which I just heard about for the first time today, sounds fantastic and like what we should be doing, and just not sure how to get that part of it involved.
How to get
but
to
now
there.
I do.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, I think the prospect, especially if I understood you correctly, that could provide a massive reduction for taxpayers. Correct? I mean, if we develop some really good community solar.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the value proposition being a 10% reduction in people's utility bill, I mean, I tend to think like in state government, if there's one thing that they want from us with respect to energy, it's if we could cut their electric bill. So here we are, we have an opportunity not only just to cut your electric bill, but also to power it with solar power, which is so important for our environment and our future.
I just echo Sue's comments that, yeah, I mean, that's what really, when I spoke about this anecdotally with Chris and et cetera, that's the thing that really excites me, the potential to do something that's better for the environment while providing savings. That's, I would really love to.
So, but process-wise, relating CCA to community solar, it would be CCA gets set up and it's working. At that point, you would then do community solar after the CCA is already up and running?
No, what I'm saying is that it could be totally integrated. So if you just imagine you're a constituent, you receive a mailing from the city, maybe you get invited to an event, but assuming you get a mailing from the city, it says, you know, explains exactly what's happened with your enrollment in the CCA program. And then if you want to take advantage of this community solar subscription, you'd basically either check a box or you go online and you'd get the process started there of subscribing. So what I'm saying is that it could be fundamental to what the offer is to the customer, that they can elect to participate in a community solar project that was sort of pre-selected, you know, beforehand.
So it would be part of the CCA.
Yeah, I mean, it would be part of. Yeah, it would.
So
you know,
whoever we decide to go with, Good Energy or whoever, we would put that as part of our bid. That what we want is the CCA with the solar.
yeah, I mean, that's absolutely up to you. If you went and you talked to the different CCA administrators and you said, you know, it's really important to me to provide access to community solar and these discounts on their bills, is that something that you will offer? That's going to help to distinguish between the different CCA administrators to make sure that you're well matched.
I have one last question. Would doing that with one of these providers as part of our bid process, requesting this community solar project, would the, what are they called? The energy providers, then be motivated to help organizations like yours to pay that money to, would they help us to set up our solar, our farms, you know, give them that last, would there be incentive for a company like Good Energy to support the work on the solar side to get them to production, integrated with National Grid?
So again, going back to Brad's slide that showed the different roles of the different entities, Good Energy is a CCA administrator.
Right.
They're not the ESCO. So they would, on your behalf, go out to the market and procure that power, just like Blue Rock Energy does for its 30,000 customers, right?
I'm saying
So the benefit would be that a community solar developer, as Brad was saying, would have the benefit of having just one entity to deal with to sign up customers for its energy output. That's a huge relief on their part. So rather than, you know, solar company X having to go door to door or advertise in Syracuse to get, you know, a few hundred customers to sign up as individuals, they would just go to, let's say it's Good Energy as your administrator, and say, we want to bid into your portfolio, just like any other energy provider would bid into your portfolio of customers.
So I'm assuming that the reason that our solar farms, our 12 farms, are not integrated with National Grid currently is financial.
I don't know the particulars of each of those 12 projects. It's often a lengthy process to build a solar farm like the kind Brad was showing. It can be many years to do that, right? So there's the environmental permitting, there's the interconnection process with the utility, there's getting your construction financing and then your long-term financing, and then, you know, ultimately getting your customers signed up to take the energy. That is often a key piece, and in fact, a lot of developers can't even get construction financing until they have a certain amount of the energy subscribed. 50–75% of the energy subscribed. So if there was a CCA operating in the area through Syracuse or another entity, that would be a huge boon to these developer companies.
They would be able to move forward in projects because they would have the guarantee of business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we could potentially leverage that to be the exclusive customer for their product and reduce
you know,
price.
there's 40,000 or so households in Syracuse. If you're bringing that kind of buying power, that's many, many community solar farms worth of output. And as Brad was saying, it lowers their costs of signing up customers. They would pass those savings. I imagine they'd pass those savings on to the city.
And you're not just selecting one project. You can select a whole portfolio of projects, and you basically can say, look, we're looking to select the lowest price, so tell us how many subscriptions and at what price, and you'll select as many as fit with your criteria. So that competition is really driving the cost down. So it would be a real boon. Now, the ESCO isn't going to mind because this is just a function of state policy. From their perspective, they're getting paid just like they would, except for their customers are happier because they're saving more because they're getting this community solar subscription. From the ESCO's perspective, it has no effect on their business whatsoever. They're just happy that their customer is happy. The utility isn't upset. I mean, this is all win-win situation, as we like to say.
Yeah, it goes back to your questions, Councilor Boyle, about is there a benefit of being local? There is really a benefit. It's sort of like the psychological aspect Brad was saying. There are not many opt-outs for the green power in Westchester because people want to support green power. So providing, the price is good and competitive and we're saving money for customers, setting that aside. If it's local green power, people feel great about that, right? Especially if it's in their community, right? Or in their area, rather than buying wind power from Minnesota or something like that.
And if it's cheaper, then they feel even better about it.
That's it. There's a whole range of opportunities in the future with demand response and getting people smart thermostats and energy storage and electric vehicles. Just really quickly, in Westchester County with their project, they developed a partnership with a local car dealer and promoted a steep discount on electric cars to the CCA participants. In fact, it was like a $10,000 discount that this dealer was offering for Nissan Leafs. Literally hundreds of these cars got sold through this offering. And like we think of CCA as having to do with electricity supply, but it's really about joining people together to sort of to forge our clean energy future. And when you do that, these kinds of opportunities arise. So you could think about that for electric vehicles or energy efficiency retrofits or a whole range of sort of clean energy products and services that you might want to offer your constituents. And what I really get excited about is that the CCA could be the place to go for local clean energy. It's like when they think of the CCA, oh yeah, that's that thing that the city of Syracuse is helping us to do all these great things with clean energy. And it's going to save me money, it's going to improve the environment and my quality of life here in the city.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
So thank you.
Thank you.
You have more to present, or was that the end?
That's it.
All right.
Great. Exciting stuff. Thank you for your time.